In the stillness of the falling snow, the entire town stood beneath the memorial candles, trembling in the freezing wind. They weren't bidding farewell to just a dog, but to a hero who had reshaped their destiny. Tears fell mingling with grateful smiles as Lucas declared, "He taught us about loyalty and that love can transform an entire community." That moment would forever haunt their hearts. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any emotional and dramatic episodes from us. The storm had come early that year, blanketing the town of Snowpine in a relentless ocean of white. Every street, every rooftop, every tree limb bowed under the crushing weight of snow, and the wind screamed like a warning through the canyons of the mountains. To anyone passing through, the place looked more like a forgotten outpost than a community where people still lived. Porch lights flickered through the swirling frost, faint and lonely against the black sky. It was the kind of night when people locked their doors, pulled their children close, and prayed the storm would pass without claiming another life. Lucas Reed knew nights like this too well. From his small cabin perched at the edge of town, he watched the snow whip across the glass, each gust dragging the ghosts of his past closer. He had worn the badge for 12 years now, but there were nights he wondered if the badge still meant anything. Years ago, in a city far from here, he had led a raid that went terribly wrong. Innocent lives lost, his partner dead, and the guilt buried in his chest like ice that never melted. Snowpine had been his retreat, his exile, and his punishment all at once. A town small enough to forget him, quiet enough to drown out the echoes of sirens in his head. But solitude was never silent. It spoke in different voices, the creak of timber in the wind, the lonely howl of wolves beyond the ridge, and the incessant pounding of memory. Lucas lived with it, carrying it like a second badge pinned to his ribs. He told himself he had earned this exile. He told himself he didn't deserve more. And most nights, he almost believed it. That night, however, fate refused to let him be alone with his ghosts. At first, it was the sound that pulled him away from the fire, faint, fragile, nearly devoured by the storm. A whimper. It came in broken intervals, thin against the roar of the wind, yet urgent enough to tug at instincts honed over years of patrol. Lucas grabbed his coat, slung his flashlight across his shoulder, and stepped into the storm. The cold hit him like a wall of knives, stealing his breath, searing his lungs. But the sound was there somewhere in the darkness beyond the pines. He trudged through knee-deep snow, the beam of light cutting slices into the black. For a moment, he thought he was chasing ghosts again. Another trick of memory dressed in sound. Then he saw it, a figure crumpled against the tree line, half buried in snow, trembling against the earth. It was a dog, a German shepherd, large, muscular once, but now gaunt from exhaustion. Its fur was matted with ice and blood, its breath shallow. The animal tried to rise when Lucas approached, baring its teeth in a last shred of defiance, but the body betrayed it. It collapsed back into the snow, eyes wide with pain, but burning with something more fear. Yes, but also resolve. "Easy," Lucas murmured, crouching low the way he once did with frightened children at crime scenes. His voice was steady despite the storm clawing around them. "I'm not here to hurt you." The dog's gaze flicked to the badge on his jacket, then to his hands, as though weighing some ancient calculus of trust. And in that instant, Lucas saw not just an injured animal, but a survivor. This dog had been through hell, and whatever hell it had fled was still too close for comfort. As Lucas reached to lift it, his fingers brushed something cold against the dog's neck. Not a collar, not a tag. A device metallic, rectangular, the size of a matchbox, but far heavier. It was strapped tight against the fur, secured with steel clasps no ordinary owner would use. He angled his flashlight toward it, and for a moment his breath stopped. The thing blinked, a faint red light pulsing like a heartbeat. "What the hell are you?" Lucas whispered. It wasn't a tracker he recognized. It wasn't a standard K9 transmitter either. It was something else, sleek-coated, humming faintly with life. And if someone had strapped it to this dog, then someone had also wanted it hidden. The thought knifed through him. Whatever had brought this animal to Snowpine wasn't random. The dog whimpered again, weaker this time. Survival overrode suspicion. Lucas tore his scarf free and wrapped it around the animal, lifting the weight into his arms. It was heavier than he expected, all muscle and bone, but limp from injury. As he staggered back toward the cabin, snow clawing at his legs, he felt the faint vibration of the device against his chest. Inside, the fire cast a fragile warmth, battling the storm's rage against the walls. Lucas laid the dog on a blanket, checking its wounds. Deep gashes along the flank, a bullet graze at the shoulder. Burns that looked chemical, unnatural. Whoever had done this hadn't just wanted the dog hurt, they had wanted it broken. Lucas's chest tightened. He had seen cruelty before, but this was different. This was systematic. Deliberate. He worked quickly, cleaning the wounds, binding what he could. The dog flinched, but did not resist, as if it understood the necessity. Shadow Lucas found himself saying, without thinking, the name rising unbidden. There was something in the way the animal's eyes followed him, something that reminded him of the partner he had lost years ago. A loyalty unshaken, even in the face of ruin. You look like a shadow pulled back from death. The dog blinked, almost as if accepting the christening. For a moment, there was peace, the storm raging outside, the fire crackling, and man and dog suspended in the fragile silence between survival and collapse. But peace never lasted. The device on Shadow's neck pulsed brighter, steady now, as if awakened. Lucas reached for it, his instincts torn between caution and necessity. If it was a tracker, leaving it on meant danger. If it was more, removing it without care might kill the dog. Before he could decide, Shadow's ears shot up. The dog growled low and guttural, staring toward the window. Lucas turned. Through the white blur of the storm, headlights glowed. 2, then 4. Vehicles creeping down the lonely road into town, too slow, too deliberate to be neighbors. Lucas's pulse slammed against his ribs. Whoever they weren't out for groceries. Not in this storm. And if they were here so soon after Shadow's arrival, then the device wasn't just broadcasting, it was bait. He reached for his radio, but static answered. The storm was jamming everything. He had no backup, no certainty, only the cold weight of choice. Shadow rose, weakly, teeth bared despite the bandages. The dog's body might have been broken, but its spirit was coiled like wire, ready to fight. Lucas crouched beside it, meeting those fierce eyes. "Looks like you brought trouble to my door," he muttered. His voice was steady, but inside the old guilt twisted. Years ago he had failed to protect. Tonight fate handed him a chance to choose differently. The vehicle stopped at the edge of the drive. Doors opened. Figures stepped into the snow, dark shapes against the white faceless in the storm. One of them raised a hand, signaling. Shadow growled deeper. Lucas tightened his grip on the pistol at his side. The storm howled louder, as if the mountain itself knew what was coming. For 7 minutes, the quiet town of Snowpine had seemed like a refuge. Now it felt like the opening act of a war Lucas Reed thought he had left behind. And somewhere in the midst of the blizzard, the truth pulsed in red light against a wounded dog's throat, waiting to change everything. The storm eased only slightly by dawn, leaving the town of Snowpine coated in a crust of ice that cracked beneath every step. Lucas Reed kept the collar device hidden beneath his jacket, his mind grinding with questions he couldn't answer. The German Shepherd Shadow now, though he hadn't admitted aloud how much the name already felt right, lay on the back seat of his cruiser, wrapped in blankets, breathing shallowly. Lucas knew he was no vet, and whatever wounds the dog carried needed more than whiskey and gauze. There was only one place in town where he could go without drawing too much attention, the small brick clinic on Main Street, where Emma Collins still turned on the lights each morning, despite having too few patients to justify the effort. Emma was a widow. Everyone in Snowpine knew that story. Her husband, a paramedic, had died 3 winters ago trying to reach a stranded family during a whiteout. He never made it. His snowmobile was found twisted at the base of a ravine, and his body the morning after. Emma had been raising their daughter Lily alone, ever since, keeping her practice alive more out of stubbornness than profit. Lucas parked in the alley to avoid the front lot, his eyes flicking to the rear view. The storm had hidden the night's visitors, but paranoia clung to him like frost. Shadow stirred as Lucas lifted him from the car, and for a moment the dog's weight pressed against his chest like a second heart. Inside the clinic smelled of antiseptic and chamomile tea. Emma looked up from the reception desk, surprise flashing across her tired but kind features. She was younger than Lucas by nearly a decade, though. Grief had carved lines on her face that shouldn't have been there. "Lucas?" she asked, half smiling in disbelief. He rarely came into town unless duty forced him. What on earth? He shifted, revealing the bundle in his arms. "Need your help." The smile vanished, replaced by instinctive focus. Emma rushed forward, ushering him into the exam room. "Set him here." Lily appeared, then, hair tangled from sleep pajamas, still wrinkled, clutching a stuffed rabbit in one hand. At 9, she was small for her age, but her eyes were wide with the curiosity of someone who had lived through too much silence. She saw the dog and gasped. "Mom." "It's a shepherd." "Stay back, Lily," Emma warned, though her daughter edged closer anyway, drawn by something magnetic. Lucas laid Shadow onto the table, stepping back as Emma's hands moved with brisk precision. She murmured to herself, examining the wounds, tracing the graze at the shoulder, noting the burns. God, what did you go through, boy? Shadow winced under her touch, but didn't resist his amber eyes watching her every move. Lucas felt tension unwind in his chest he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. For the first time since last night, he wasn't alone in this. Bullet wound, Emma said quietly. Missed the bone. That's lucky. The burns are chemical, maybe. Definitely man-made. He's dehydrated, but he's a fighter. She looked at Lucas. Where'd you find him? Out by the ridge, Lucas answered, his tone clipped, unwilling to say more. Half dead. Emma frowned, sensing his walls but not pressing. She cleaned, stitched, bandaged. Her movements were gentle yet unyielding, as if willing life back into the battered body. Meanwhile, Lily crept closer. Shadow's ears flicked toward her, and though his body trembled with exhaustion, his gaze softened. Lily whispered, Hey there, boy. You're safe now. Lucas opened his mouth to warn her, but Shadow did something unexpected. He lowered his head, nudging her small hand with his muzzle. Lily's giggle bubbled through the sterile air, fragile but bright. She stroked his fur, careful of the bandages, her face glowing with wonder. Emma froze, startled. Lily. But Lucas caught it too, the way Shadow's breathing eased. The way his eyes half closed, as if for the first time in hours, he could rest. He had accepted her. Looks like he made his choice. Lucas muttered more to himself than anyone. Emma's gaze softened. Animals know things we don't. When the work was done, Emma pressed warm compresses against the wounds, then draped another blanket over him. Lily stayed at his side, whispering stories about the stuffed rabbit in her hand, as though trying to share her world with this battered stranger. And through it all, Shadow remained still, watching her with a quiet, loyal intensity. Emma glanced at Lucas. He needs a name. Lucas hesitated. The word had already taken root, but saying it aloud felt like surrender. Shadow, he said finally. Lily's face lit up. Addo, yes. That's perfect. She bent close, whispering, You're Shadow now. You're ours. Lucas caught the slip of the tongue, ours. Something tightened in his chest. He wasn't part of ours. He never had been. But the warmth of that little voice pierced the ice all the same. For a moment, the room felt like something it hadn't in years alive. The crackle of grief still lingered, but layered with it was hope, fragile and unexpected. That's when the unease returned. Lucas caught it first. The faint glare of headlights bleeding through the blinds. Not the lazy rhythm of a neighbor, not the hum of morning traffic. This was stillness. A vehicle parked without moving. He shifted toward the window. Through a sliver in the blinds, he spotted it, a dark SUV idling across the street. Engine low, windows tinted. Too new for the town, too silent for comfort. Emma followed his gaze, her hands stilling. Lucas, he stepped back, jaw tightening. How many people come here at dawn for checkups? Her silence was answer enough. The SUV didn't leave. It just sat there watching. Shadow stirred, growling faintly despite his exhaustion. His ears pricked toward the window, as if he recognized the threat before anyone else. Lucas felt the storm return, though outside the sky had calmed. He had seen this pattern too many times, Watcher's first action later. Whoever they were, they hadn't come to Snowpine for the scenery. And if they were after the dog, then bringing him here might have just put Emma and Lily in the crosshairs. Emma's voice was low, steady, despite the flicker of fear. What did you bring to my door, Lucas? He couldn't answer. Not yet. The truth was still buried in that blinking device, hidden in his jacket, and in the questions clawing through his mind. All he knew was this Shadow wasn't just a stray. And the storm outside wasn't the only danger closing in. Lily, oblivious to the tension, stroked Shadow's ear and whispered, Don't worry, boy. We'll keep you safe. Lucas stared at the SUV. His reflection caught in the glass, haunted eyes, clenched jaw, a man who had sworn never to fail again. He tightened his grip on the curtain, every muscle strung tight. The warmth of the clinic clashed with the cold presence waiting outside. For now, there was no gunfire, no shouting. Just silence heavy enough to crush breath. The kind of silence that came before the storm hit again. And in that fragile space, man, woman, child, and dog found themselves bound together by something larger than choice, the inevitability of what was coming. The morning stretched thin over Snowpine light, struggling to break through the storm's aftermath. The SUV had disappeared before Emma or Lily could catch more than a glimpse, but Lucas knew better than to believe it was gone for good. Watchers always circled back. He had seen enough of them in another life. Shadow lay curled on a blanket near the exam table, stitches holding but still raw, his breathing steadier now. Emma was cleaning her tools, her movements brisk and silent, her eyes occasionally cutting toward Lucas, as if waiting for him to explain what kind of trouble he had just dragged into her clinic. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, her hand resting gently on the dog's flank. Lucas tried to ignore the child's soft humming, tried to ignore the way Shadow's ears twitched in time with her voice. His mind was on the device he had found on the dog's collar. It hadn't been built for tracking alone, that much he understood from the faint glow the microports designed with precision no civilian engineer would waste on a simple pet tag. He needed answers, and answers were rarely found in daylight. Lucas Emma said at last, breaking the silence. Whoever's sitting out there watching isn't a neighbor. What are we up against? He didn't answer, not yet. Instead, he pulled the device from his jacket and set it on the metal tray. Its surface was blackened at the edges, as if scorched by fire, but the core remained intact. Emma leaned closer, cautious, while Lily tilted her head with unabashed curiosity. It's not a tracker, Lucas said finally. His voice carried the same weight he used years ago, giving orders to rookies who didn't yet understand the danger they were walking into. It's something else. Emma frowned. Something else like what? Lucas's thumb brushed the surface, and for a split second, light flickered. A cascade of symbols scrolled across the embedded screen, too quick for Lily to follow, but sharp enough to freeze the blood in Lucas's veins. He recognized the style military-grade encryption, not the kind you saw on stolen laptops or contraband radios. This was something darker, something buried. Biotech, he muttered under his breath. God damn it. Emma stiffened. Biotech, you mean? Before she could finish, his radio crackled. It wasn't a call. Just static at first. Then a voice clipped an artificial run through a filter that turned human words into a metallic growl. Sheriff Reed, it said, we know what you found. The animal is not yours. Return it and walk away. You have until sundown. The radio went dead. Emma's hands trembled slightly on the tray. Lily's humming stopped. Shadow lifted his head, ears pricked a low rumble vibrating in his chest, as if he too had understood. Lucas picked up the radio, pressed the button. Who is this? Silence. He slammed it down harder than necessary. Emma whispered, Lucas, what are you involved in? His jaw tightened. He didn't want to drag her deeper. But the moment he brought Shadow here, she and Lily were already inside the storm. Something big enough to kill for, he said flatly. Emma's face paled. She turned to Lily. Sweetheart, go upstairs, please. But Lily didn't move. Her hand remained on Shadow's fur, her eyes wide but calm, in a way that unnerved both adults. Mom, she said softly. He's not dangerous. He's scared. Lucas wanted to argue, but then Shadow did something that stopped him cold. The dog shifted suddenly, his muscles twitching as though struck by an invisible current. His eyes dilated, unfocused, fixed on something far beyond the clinic walls. He staggered to his feet despite Emma's protests, ears sharp, body rigid. For a terrifying moment, he wasn't a wounded animal anymore. He was a machine remembering its purpose. Lily gasped, backing away slightly. Mom, look. Shadow snapped his head toward the window, staring out with an intensity that chilled Lucas to the marrow. It was as if he recognized the world outside, as if memories burned through him. Not human, but not entirely animal either. He barked once, a sharp cutting sound that made the glass tremble. Emma clutched Lily's shoulder. What's happening to him? Lucas stared at the collar device, at the encrypted flash still pulsing faintly on the tray. He's remembering. The words slipped out before he could stop them, heavy and strange. Shadow's reaction wasn't random. It was triggered by what Lucas couldn't say. But the signs were unmistakable. This dog had seen things no living creature should have seen, carried things inside him that weren't meant for a leash or a home. Then the clinic phone rang. Emma startled, nearly dropping her instruments. Calls at this hour were rare. She picked up cautiously. The voice on the other end was smooth, polite, chilling. Dr. Collins, it said. You have something of ours. Give it back and no one gets hurt. Emma's breath hitched. She slammed the phone down, her eyes darting to Lucas. But Lucas's radio buzzed again. This time, no voice, only a message, digitally transmitted words appearing on the tiny cracked screen. Bring the dog to the edge of town by midnight. If not, the whole town burns. The letters seared themselves into his mind. He felt the weight of it, like a curse. Lily whispered, They want Shadow. Emma knelt, pulling her daughter close. You don't have to be afraid, she said, though her voice betrayed her. But Lily wasn't afraid. She looked at Shadow, who now stood tall despite the bandages, and said quietly, He knows them. Lucas's gaze snapped to her. What do you mean? I can tell Lily insisted. Her small hand hovered near Shadow's ear. When he looked out the window, it was like he saw before. like he remembered people who hurt him. Lucas's stomach turned. Children noticed things adults trained themselves to ignore. And he couldn't shake the feeling she was right. Shadow paced restless every step, pulling at his stitches. But he didn't seem to feel the pain. His growls deepened each time the wind rattled the glass. Each shadow outside turning his body into a taut wire. Emma whispered, "Lucas, if this is about biotech, it's about more than that," he cut in. His voice was hard, but inside he felt the crack widening. He had chased smugglers before, seen drugs, weapons, even stolen organs. But this, a living creature turned into a vessel of secrets, a courier carrying stolen science in his flesh. This was different. This was war disguised as contraband. And now it was here in their town. Lucas picked up the collar again, resisting the urge to smash it. He needed to know what it contained, why it mattered so much. But unlocking it meant opening doors he had tried to keep shut since leaving federal service. The SUV outside earlier hadn't been the end. It was only the opening move. Whoever wanted Shadow wouldn't stop with threats. They'd come with fire if necessary. And the people of Snowpine, quiet, unsuspecting, unprepared, would pay the price. Lucas forced himself to breathe. "I'll handle this," he said. Emma's eyes flashed anger. "Handle this? They just threatened the entire town. Lucas, you can't." "I can," he snapped, then softened. "I have to. This isn't your fight." But Lily spoke again, her voice steady in a way that silenced both adults. "It is now. Shadow chose us." The words hung there, impossible to dismiss. Shadow stopped pacing, then settling beside Lily, as if her declaration had anchored him. He pressed against her small frame, protective, loyal, in a way that made Lucas's chest ache. The clock ticked louder in the silence. Outside, the world looked unchanged. Snow-dusted streets, icicles clinging to gutters, but inside, everything had shifted. The threat was no longer abstract. It was written into the walls of their lives. Lucas holstered the radio, pocketed the collar device, and looked at Emma. "They'll try again. And they won't just come for him. They'll come for you, for Lily, for anyone I talk to. That's how they work." Emma's jaw tightened. "Then you'd better not be standing alone when they do." Her defiance surprised him, but he saw the truth in her eyes. Grief had already taken everything once. She wouldn't let nameless strangers take what remained. Shadow lifted his head, a growl low and resonant, as if agreeing. Lucas turned toward the door, every instinct screaming that time was slipping faster than he could hold it. He didn't know yet how to fight them, but he knew one thing with certainty. Shadow wasn't just carrying secrets. He was the secret. And if they couldn't protect him, Snowpine would fall long before the midnight deadline. The snow outside Snowpine had turned into a kind of silence that wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that pressed on a man's chest and made every sound, every shadow carry weight. Lucas Reed knew that silence. He had heard it before on missions that went wrong, when the world seemed to pause just long enough to announce something terrible was about to break. He sat alone in his office at the small-town precinct, the yellowed light from the desk lamp falling across the encrypted device he had carefully detached from Shadow's collar. He had stared at it for hours, running his fingers along its smooth metal casing. Its tiny vented grooves, the faint flicker of a dormant signal light. The technology was advanced far beyond anything an ordinary K9 should have carried. And the fact that it was hidden, buried beneath scar tissue and layers of synthetic stitching, told Lucas it wasn't meant to be found. He leaned back, dragging a hand down his face, and exhaled. He knew the steps of the dance already. You find something that doesn't belong. You push at it, and suddenly doors that were meant to stay locked open, just wide enough for you to see what you were never supposed to. That was the dangerous part, seeing too much. The sound of the old computer terminal humming in the corner seemed louder tonight. Lucas typed with careful precision, pulling up whatever government access channels he still had access to from his years in the field. He was no hacker, but he knew the bones of the system. The device was some kind of storage capsule encrypted with layers that suggested classified clearance. That alone made his stomach tighten. But it was the list of names buried in the metadata, half corrupted, half redacted, that froze his blood. Several names he recognized immediately: federal officers, government scientists, private contractors. And then one name pulsed out of the screen like a knife drawn under a spotlight: Colonel Richard Kane. Lucas's jaw locked. The taste of iron rose in his mouth, an old instinct from when rage and memory mixed. Kane had been his commanding officer years ago, back when Lucas still wore the badge of a federal agent instead of a small-town sheriff. Kane had been the kind of man who commanded silence by walking into a room, a leader whose word was law. Lucas had trusted him, once followed him into operations he couldn't even tell his mother about, until the day everything went to hell. Until the day an operation in Caracas had ended with dead civilians and Lucas carrying the guilt of survivors he couldn't save because Kane had ordered the team to pull out early, protecting assets over lives. Lucas had buried that anger, shoved it deep enough to survive. But now here was Kane's name tangled in a smuggling network involving biotechnological contraband hidden inside the collar of a dog left to die on the outskirts of Snowpine. The universe had a cruel way of dragging ghosts back into the light. The creak of the precinct door pulled him from his spiral. Deputy Mark, a younger cop with more nerves than years of service, entered holding a folded piece of paper in a latex glove. His face was pale. "This was stuck to the front door," Mark said, voice wavering. Lucas took it, unfolded the single sheet. The words were scrawled in thick black ink, deliberate and cold. "Hand over the dog, or the whole town pays." There was no signature, no symbol, no flourish. Just a thread as sharp and final as a blade. Lucas's eyes scanned the message again, feeling the weight of every letter. They knew. Whoever they were, they knew the dog had survived. And now they knew he had it. The walls of Snowpine suddenly felt smaller, like the whole town was a chessboard and everyone in it just became a pawn. At the Collins household, Emma tried to keep the night normal, though nothing about the air felt normal anymore. She had lit the old fireplace, its crackle fighting back the frost that clung to the edges of the window. Lily sat cross-legged on the rug, her fingers stroking Shadow's coarse fur. The dog's breathing was steadier now, his wounds beginning to close under Emma's careful stitches and medication. But his eyes, the sharp amber gaze that followed every sound, seemed older than pain. "You're safe here," Lily whispered, leaning close to Shadow's ear, as though the dog could understand English the way a friend would. "I'll protect you." Shadow shifted, pressing his head into her lap with a low rumble that wasn't a growl, but something closer to agreement. His ears flicked toward the window, then his muscles tensing. Emma noticed it too. She rose, crossing to the curtains. Outside, barely visible in the curtain of snowfall, headlights glowed from a black SUV parked across the street. Its engine was running exhaust, pluming faintly into the icy air. Her stomach dropped. Nobody parked on their street this late, not in a storm. And nobody just sat there. Lucas said things might get complicated, Emma murmured to herself, pulling the curtains shut before Lily could notice. But Lily noticed everything. "Mom, who's outside?" "No one, sweetheart." Emma lied gently, her voice soft, steady the way she used to when Lily woke up from nightmares. "Just someone lost in the storm." But Shadow didn't believe it. His body stiffened, a low growl vibrating in his chest. Later that night, Lucas pulled up in front of Emma's house, the crunch of his tires on the icy road, louder than usual. He stepped out, every nerve on alert. He had seen the SUV circling town earlier, lingering too long near the school, the gas station now here. He approached with measured steps, one hand on the grip of his sidearm, the other carrying a small duffel. Emma opened the door before he could knock, her face pale but composed. "They're here, aren't they?" Lucas didn't answer right away. His eyes swept past her, scanning the shadows at the edges of the yard. Finally, he met her gaze. "Yeah, they're here." Inside, Lily ran to him, her small arms wrapping around his waist. "Shadow's better," she said quickly, as if desperate to give him good news. "He's walking now. He follows me everywhere." Lucas managed a tight smile, brushing her hair back. His eyes flicked to the dog, who indeed stood on his own tail, low but steady. His gaze locked on the door as if he too knew danger, hovered just outside. "You've got yourself a guardian," Lucas said quietly. Shadow's ears twitched at his words, and for a fleeting second, Lucas could have sworn the animal understood. He set the duffel down, unzipped it, pulling out a small scanner he'd borrowed from the precinct. "I need to run a deeper check on that device. It's not just storage it might be transmitting." Emma crossed her arms, the firelight flickering over her worried face. "Transmitting to who?" Lucas didn't answer immediately. He powered the scanner, watching the screen flare with green static. Slowly, numbers began to climb, data signals pulsing like a heartbeat. "To whoever's watching us," Lucas finally muttered. "And whoever's watching has resources." Outside, the SUV's headlights went dark. The next morning, Snowpine awoke to the kind of tension people feel, but don't speak about. Conversations at the diner were hushed, eyes darting toward the window more than toward their coffee. The black SUV was still seen in different corners of town, sometimes with 2 figures inside, sometimes 3. No plates, no faces, just presence. Lucas kept his investigation quiet, slipping into records that weren't meant to be touched. Every breadcrumb led back to the same rotten tree, Colonel Richard Kane. The man had traded his federal stars for contracts with private defense labs, and those labs were at the center of experimental biotech shipments gone missing. Dogs, children, untraceable materials, all disappearing into the same shadows. And now one of those shadows was lying in Emma Collins's living room, healing by the fire. Lucas closed the file on his desk. his reflection in the darkened computer screen, staring back like a man half buried by secrets. Back at Emma's house, Lily, bundled in her coat and scarf, trudged out into the snowy yard. Shadow padded beside her steps. Sure, now his injuries fading into memory. He stayed close, always close, his body angling between her and the street. Lily giggled as she tossed a small snowball, watching Shadow snap at it, mid-air flakes scattering across his muzzle. For a brief moment, it was easy to forget the SUV, the threats, the encrypted device. It was just a girl and her dog, Joy, cracking through the frost. But then the sound of a camera shutter echoed faintly from across the street. Emma rushed outside, pulling Lily back, her own heart hammering. She saw the glint of a lens retreating into the dark window of the SUV. Shadow growled low, stepping forward until Emma pulled him back. His fur bristled, his eyes blazing with something primal. The message was clear. He wasn't just recovering anymore. He was watching, guarding, waiting. And for Lucas, for Emma, for Lily, that realization cut both ways. It meant they weren't alone in this fight, but it also meant the fight had already begun. The storm wasn't coming. It was here. The storm struck without warning, a brutal curtain of white that swallowed Snowpine whole. One moment the town sat wrapped in uneasy silence, every porch light glowing dim against the creeping fog of fear. The next, the world was erased in a howling blizzard. Power lines crackled, flickered, then died, plunging the entire community into darkness. Houses became silhouettes, their windows black, their chimneys spewing smoke into the violent swirl of snow. The only sound was the wind, shrieking like 1,000 broken voices, battering rooftops, rattling shutters, slamming against doors with a ferocity that felt almost personal. Inside Emma Collins's modest home, candles were lit hurriedly, their trembling flames carving shadows across the walls. Lucas stood near the window, jaw-tight, eyes locked on the street outside. He had been through storms before, natural disasters, war zones, chaos. But something about this night prickled beneath his skin. The blizzard wasn't just weather. It felt like a cover. A shroud lay deliberately over the town, allowing threats to move unseen. Shadow paced restlessly near the door. His wounded body still not fully healed, but his instincts alive, sharper than any human's. His ears twitched, nose lifted, and every muscle rippled with urgency. He wasn't just reacting to the storm. He was listening to something beyond it. Then, without warning, he whined low in his throat, pressed his nose to the door, and pawed at it as if demanding to be let out. "Something's wrong," Lucas muttered. Emma, clutching Lily close, shook her head. In this storm, he's still hurt. But Lily, her wide eyes reflecting the candlelight, whispered, "He knows. He wants us to follow." There was a conviction in her voice that silenced the room. Lucas bent down, met Shadow's gaze. Those amber eyes were not frantic. They were deliberate, filled with a kind of intelligence that cut through doubt. Lucas had seen working dogs operate with near-human precision before. But this was different. Shadow wasn't following a command, he was giving one. Lucas grabbed his coat and nodded at Emma. "We go. Now. Whatever he's trying to show us, it matters." The three of them stepped into the storm, the cold slashing at their faces like knives snow, instantly soaking their clothes. Shadow took the lead, a dark silhouette against the whiteout, moving with a certainty that defied the chaos. His paws pressed into the snow with purpose, leaving a trail that Lucas and Emma followed with Lily, sandwiched safely between them. The deeper they went into the forest, the darker it became, the storm, swallowing even the faint glow of the town behind them. Branches whipped in the wind, creaking like tortured bones. The air was so cold it burned the lungs, every breath turning into shards of ice. Lucas's instincts screamed at him. This was insane, leading a child and a half-healed dog into the woods during a blizzard. Yet something inside told him Shadow knew exactly where he was going. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then Shadow stopped. His body's stiffened tail low, but straight, a sentinel in the storm. He pawed furiously at the snow near a jagged outcropping of rock, partially hidden by drifts. Lucas moved closer, brushing snow away with his gloves, until his hand struck something solid, metal cold, and unnatural against the earth. A hatch, half buried, rusted around the edges, but unmistakably man-made. Lucas's pulse spiked. He pulled harder, scraping away snow until the outline of a steel door emerged, bolted tight, reinforced. Emma's breath fogged in the dark air, her voice shaking. "What is this?" Lucas didn't answer. His mind raced back to the coded device around Shadow's neck, the encrypted files he hadn't been able to break, the whispered threats left at the station. This wasn't random. Shadow hadn't wandered into his life by accident. He had been leading them here from the beginning. With a grunt, Lucas braced himself and heaved the hatch open. The wind howled louder, as if protesting. A staircase descended into the ground, the faint smell of chemicals and damp air rising up to meet them. Emma grabbed Lily's hand. "We shouldn't." But Lily's eyes were fixed on Shadow, who was already at the top of the stairs looking back at them with a commanding stillness. "He says it's important?" Lily whispered, her words carrying the eerie weight of faith. Lucas descended, first flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. The stairs were narrow steel, echoing under his boots. The deeper they went, the more the sounds of the storm vanished, replaced by a low hum, almost electrical. The air thickened, tinged with sterility, the kind found in hospitals or laboratories. At the bottom lay a heavy door. Lucas pushed it open and froze. Rows of equipment lined the walls, computers, storage units. Strange machines humming faintly despite the power outage above. Crates stamped with government insignias sat stacked in corners, some cracked open to reveal vials, syringes, and sealed containers filled with liquids that glowed faintly under the beam. Smuggling wasn't just a theory, it was fact right here, hidden under the snow. But it wasn't the equipment that made Emma gasp and cover Lily's eyes. In the far chamber behind reinforced glass were children. 5, maybe 6 of them, ranging in age from toddlers to early teens. Thin pale, their arms marked with injection sites. Some were awake, staring blankly, as if too drained to move. Others were curled on cots, their chests rising faintly. Machines were connected to them, IV drips, monitors powered by backup generators that hummed steadily in the silence. Emma staggered back, horror etched across her face. "Oh my God. Lucas, they're experiments," Lucas growled, fists clenching. His mind raced, connecting fragments of information he had gathered over the years. Rumors of biotech smuggling, whispers of unauthorized trials, the encrypted codes hidden in Shadow's device. This was it. This was the proof. Shadow pressed close to the glass, his body-taut ears pinned, a low growl vibrating from his chest. He knew this place. Somehow, some way, he had been here before. Lily reached out and touched his fur gently. "They heard him here," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "He remembers?" Lucas's gut twisted. Shadow wasn't just a survivor, he was a witness. Maybe even a subject. The device on his collar wasn't just data storage. It was insurance. A way to lead someone here, to reveal what was happening if he ever escaped. Emma's hands trembled as she pressed them against the glass, eyes locking on a boy no older than Lily. His gaze flickered weakly toward her, a silent plea for help that tore through every layer of her being. "We can't leave them," she whispered. "We won't," Lucas said, voice like steel. "But we need to be smart. Whoever built this will come back, and they'll kill to protect it." As if in answer, a distant clang echoed through the bunker, metal against metal. Lucas froze, flashlight snapping toward the sound. The storm above roared on, but down here something else was moving. Shadow snarled, body lowering, ready. Lucas pulled his weapon, pulse hammering. They weren't alone. The storm outside was no accident. It was covered just like he had feared. And now, in the belly of Snowpine's darkest secret, Lucas read, Emma Collins, Lily, and Shadow had uncovered the truth. But with the truth came danger, more immediate, more lethal than they had ever imagined. The hatch above slammed shut. The darkness deepened, and the battle for survival had only just begun. The sound came from behind the glass, so faint, so fragile. Lucas almost believed it was only the storm echoing through steel, but then it repeated, clearer, weak, yet deliberate. A boy's voice cracked from thirst and exhaustion. Shadow. Lucas's flashlight snapped to the corner where the boy sat propped on a cot. He was maybe 10, his face gaunt, hair matted, but his eyes burned with a sudden flicker of recognition. His lips trembled as he forced the name again, louder this time, carrying across the sterile chamber like a blade. Shadow. Emma froze, clutching Lily tighter. Lucas's pulse slammed in his chest. The boy wasn't imagining things. He knew the dog. He had met him. Which meant Shadow hadn't just stumbled into their lives, he had once been inside this hell. Shadow stepped closer to the glass, ears pricked, tail rigid. For a moment he seemed frozen, caught between memory and instinct. Then his body quaked with a growl, a deep wounded sound that wasn't anger, but grief. The boy's skeletal arm lifted weakly, pressing against the barrier, as if reaching for him. "You were here," Lucas whispered, piecing it together. "They used you, tested on you, and you got out." Emma's eyes brimmed with horror. "And he came back, to show us, to save the others." Lily's tiny voice broke the silence. "He remembers them." The truth struck Lucas harder than any storm. Shadow wasn't just leading them to the bunker for evidence, he was leading them home, back to the children left behind. His fight wasn't just survival, it was rescue. Lucas forced his hands steady and examined the lock on the glass chamber. Industrial grade, reinforced. But storms taught him something: nothing built by man was truly unbreakable. He holstered his weapon and set his shoulder against the edge, searching for weaknesses. "Emma, help me. We're not leaving them here." The hum of generators filled the silence as Lucas pried at the seams. Emma grabbed a discarded metal rod and hammered at the bolts. Shadow barked sharply, as if urging them faster. Lily stood pressed against Emma's coat, whispering encouragement to the children inside, her voice soft and fearless, carrying across the glass. Minutes dragged like hours. Finally, with one brutal shove, the lock snapped. The door burst open, metal clanging against concrete. Cold, sterile air rushed out, mingling with the storm's distant roar. The children flinched at the sound, but didn't run. They were too weak. Emma rushed in her hands, gentle as she knelt before them. "You're safe now. We're getting you out." Lucas moved quickly, unhooking IV lines, yanking cords free from machines that hummed in protest. The boy who had spoken Shadow's name clung to the dog as soon as he was freed, pressing his face into Shadow's fur with a sob that tore through the bunker. Shadow lowered himself, letting the boy hold on, his body still trembling with that strange mixture of fury and recognition. For one fragile moment, hope existed. But hope rarely came without cost. The clang returned, this time closer. Boots on steel. Voices echoing down the corridor, muffled by the storm above, but unmistakably hostile. Lucas's blood chilled. "They're here." Emma's head snapped up, fear flashing across her face. "How many?" "Doesn't matter," Lucas said, pulling his gun free. "Enough to bury us if we don't move." He scanned the room, searching for an exit. There was only the hatch they had entered, and now it was closing in with the sound of boots. Trapped. Unless... ventilation shaft. Lucas pointed to the narrow duct overhead. "Emma, get the kids in there. Crawl space runs to the tree line. I'll hold them off." "No," Emma hissed. "You'll be killed. Better me than all of you. Move." Emma hesitated, torn. But Shadow's growl pushed her into action. She lifted the nearest child toward the vent, helping them climb inside. The others followed, weak but desperate, shuffling into the narrow space that promised freedom. Lily clutched Shadow's collar. "He stays with us," she whispered fiercely. Lucas met Shadow's eyes. "Keep them alive. That's your mission now." But Shadow didn't move toward the vent. He pressed against Lucas's leg, gaze burning with the same resolve Lucas saw in soldiers who refused to leave their brothers behind. "No," Lucas muttered. "You can't." The sound of bolts snapping upstairs cut him off. The enemy was here. There was no time left for argument. The first figure burst into the chamber, a man in black, tactical gear rifle raised. Lucas fired before the man had a chance to blink, the shot echoing like thunder through the underground. The soldier crumpled weapon clattering across the floor. "Go," Lucas roared. Emma shoved the last child into the vent. She crawled in after them, pulling Lily close. Just before disappearing into the dark, she looked back at Lucas, eyes wet with terror and gratitude. Then she was gone. The corridor exploded with gunfire. Lucas ducked behind a crate, returning fire with deadly precision. Bullets sparked against steel shards of concrete raining down. Shadow darted low, a blur in the chaos, slamming into one of the attackers and tearing the weapon from his grip. The man screamed, silenced quickly by Lucas's second shot. The fight was a blur of noise and violence. Lucas moved like the soldier he once was. Each movement calculated, each shot deliberate. But there were too many. He knew they couldn't win, not here, not surrounded. They needed the storm. "Shadow," he shouted, gesturing toward the hatch. "We're moving." Together they fought their way back up the steel stairs, bullets ringing against the walls. The storm swallowed them as they burst out of the bunker, the blizzard instantly erasing sight lines. Gunfire followed, muffled by snow. But the storm was on their side now. Visibility was near zero. Confusion was their ally. Lucas grabbed Shadow's collar and pushed forward, plunging into the whiteout. His lungs burned, snow slicing across his skin. Somewhere in the distance, Emma and the children would be crawling toward safety. He only needed to buy them time. But the enemy was prepared for this terrain. Shadows moved within the snow rifles flashing. They weren't retreating, they were hunting. Lucas ducked behind a fallen tree, heart hammering. He could feel the ground vibrating faintly under the storm's howl, a sensation too steady, too unnatural. His soldier's instincts screamed. This wasn't just snow underfoot. It was rigged. Minefield, he realized, horror curling in his gut. A sharp click split the night. Lucas's boot froze mid-step. He looked down and saw the pressure plate hidden beneath the snow, barely visible. His breath hitched. One wrong move, and he'd be torn apart. "Damn it," he whispered. Shadow froze beside him. Growl fading to silence. Then the dog moved, slowly, deliberately, pressing his body against Lucas's leg. His eyes were steady, unflinching. He knew. Somehow impossibly, he understood. "Don't you dare," Lucas hissed through clenched teeth. But Shadow shifted his weight, nudging Lucas backward, step by step, forcing him away from the plate. Lucas tried to resist, but the animal's strength was relentless. Then in one sudden movement, Shadow lunged forward, slamming his paw down beside Lucas's trapped boot. The ground erupted. The mine detonated with a deafening roar, snow and fire blasting upward in a geyser of destruction. Lucas was thrown backward, the air ripped from his lungs, his body crashing into the frozen earth. The shockwave rattled his bones, ears ringing, vision fractured by smoke and snow. Through the haze, he saw Shadow bloodied, thrown against the snowbank, body trembling but alive. The dog had shifted the blast just enough, saving Lucas from being torn apart. Rage surged through Lucas, a fury that cut through the pain. He scrambled to his feet, dragging Shadow into his arms despite the dog's weight. "Not you," he rasped. "Not tonight." Gunfire cracked again, closer now, the enemy closing in. Lucas clutched Shadow tight, forcing his battered body to move every step a war against pain and exhaustion. The storm howled, swallowing their tracks, but it wouldn't hide them forever. Somewhere in the white void, Emma and the children were running for their lives. Lucas had one mission left: survive long enough to reach them. And as the storm screamed its fury across Snowpine, Lucas realized the fight wasn't just about exposing the truth anymore. It was about saving the only family they had left, the broken, the hunted, and the ones the world had forgotten. The snow closed around them, erasing the battlefield, turning the night into a blur of survival. And behind them, the enemy kept coming. The storm howled like a living creature, battering against the battered windows of the Rangers' outpost, where Lucas Reed had taken temporary refuge. His breath steamed in the frozen air, his knuckles white around the edge of his service pistol. Across the dimly lit room, shadowed by the flickering flame of a kerosene lantern, stood a man he once saluted, once trusted with his very life, Colonel Adrian Cole. Time had carved harder lines into the man's face. But his eyes, the same cold, calculating eyes Lucas remembered from his days in uniform, burned with cruel satisfaction. Cole's voice cut through the storm, slow and deliberate, heavy with venom. "You never understood, Reed. You thought loyalty was enough. But loyalty doesn't win wars. Power does. I fed you the wrong coordinates that day, and your team paid the price." The words hit Lucas like shrapnel. His pulse hammered in his throat, memories clawing to the surface. His men screaming over the radio, the sudden eruption of gunfire, the silence that followed. For years he had carried the guilt, believing it was his mistake. But here, face to face with the truth, rage surged through him, hot and merciless. "You!" Lucas's voice cracked with fury, his jaw clenched so tight it hurt. "You set us up." Cole didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the floorboards, his gloved hand tightening around a sidearm gleaming under the lantern light. And then he twisted the knife deeper. "I didn't just set you up. I needed you broken. Needed you out of the way while we built something bigger. That dog, your precious Shadow, wasn't lost. He was ours. A witness, a vessel, and now he's nothing but leverage. Now he's..." From the corner of the room came a muffled whimper. Lucas's eyes snapped to the source, and his stomach dropped. Emma and Lily, bound and gagged, sat against the wall. Emma's eyes met his wide with a mixture of terror and defiance, while Lily trembled but clutched her mother's hand with all the bravery a child could muster. "Let them go!" Lucas barked, his weapon rising instinctively. But Cole only chuckled, raising his own pistol and pressing it against Emma's temple. The sound of Lily's muffled cry sliced through the room like glass. "Not until you give me what I want," Cole said, his tone eerily calm. "The dog, the data, and your compliance. Or I'll make sure this little family becomes just another casualty in your endless failures." Lucas's breath came ragged, his heart pounding against his ribs like it wanted to shatter free. Every instinct screamed at him to fire, to end this monster here and now. But one wrong move and Emma, Lily, they'd pay the price. He lowered his gun a fraction, muscles trembling with restraint. Cole smirked, sensing his torment. "That's the Reed I remember. Always hesitating, always trying to play the hero. But heroes die, Lucas, and the world doesn't mourn them. Make the wrong choice here, and you'll watch them bleed." Shadow crouched low near Lucas's side, let out a low, guttural growl. His golden eyes locked on Cole, ears, flat body taut, like a drawn bow. Lucas felt the heat of the animal's presence at his side, a reminder of the silent bond they had forged in the days since Snowpine's nightmare began. The dog's body vibrated with tension, sensing his handler's inner war ready to lunge the moment a path opened. Lucas forced his focus back onto Emma. Her gaze wasn't pleading, it was commanding. Her eyes burned with an unspoken message: fight. Don't give in. It was Lily, though, who broke him. The girl's tears streaked silently down her pale cheeks, but her small nod told him she trusted him to protect them. That fragile trust weighed heavier than any weapon in his hand. Cole tilted his head, savoring Lucas's agony. You see, they're nothing to me. Pawns. Just like your men were. But to you, they're your weakness. That's why you'll never beat me. Because you care. For a heartbeat, the storm outside seemed to fade, leaving only the thunder of Lucas's pulse and the rasp of his breathing. He could almost hear his fallen comrades, their voices echoing in his mind. Don't break again, Lucas. Not this time. He straightened his jaw like iron. You're wrong, he said, voice low, steady, dangerous. They're not my weakness. They're the only reason I'm still standing. The lantern flame flickered violently, as if the storm itself bent closer to hear. Cole sneered, tightening his grip on Emma, pressing the cold muzzle harder into her skin. Then choose, Reed. The dog or the family? What matters more? The question was a knife. Shadow's growl deepened, vibrating the air, his body coiled to strike. Lucas's mind raced, searching for any crack, any edge. He knew one thing with absolute certainty: giving in wasn't an option. Not again. Every muscle in his body screamed for release, for action. He remembered the bitter night his team had died, the feeling of helplessness that consumed him. This moment was different. He wasn't helpless. He wasn't alone. He had Shadow, Emma, Lily, and the fire of a second chance. Lucas shifted his stance, eyes burning into Cole's. He spoke with a clarity that cut through the storm. You might think you broke me, Adrian, but tonight I break you. The tension coiled tighter, seconds stretching into an eternity. Cole's finger hovered on the trigger. Emma braced. Lily squeezed her mother's hand. Shadow quivered with uncontainable fury. And then, the world shattered in motion. Cole yanked Emma upright, as a shield dragging her closer. Snarling, don't test me, Reed. His weapon flicked toward Lily, cruel intent flashing. Lucas lunged sideways, drawing Cole's aim. In that split-second opening, Shadow exploded forward like a bullet fired from the earth itself. His snarl ripped through the outpost, a primal fury that belonged to no ordinary dog. The room detonated in chaos, gunfire, shouts, the storm's roar crashing in through broken glass. Lucas fired a crack of defiance echoing into the night. Cole staggered, his grip slipping, but not falling. His eyes blazed with rage, his words spat like venom. You can't save them all, Reed. You never could. But Lucas didn't hear the rest. All he saw was Emma ripping free, Lily darting into his arms, Shadow locked in mortal combat against the monster who had haunted Lucas's past and now threatened his future. The room, the storm, the world itself seemed to collapse into that singular, brutal truth. This was no longer about survival. It was about redemption. And Lucas Reed was ready to give everything to see it through. The forest was a cathedral of ice and violence. Wind screamed through the skeletal trees, bending their frozen limbs until they groaned like dying giants. Snow slashed sideways, reducing sightlines to mere feet, turning every shadow into a threat. The storm was no longer just weather. It was a battlefield ally, masking sound, twisting direction, suffocating breath. Lucas Reed moved through it with his heart hammering, his body raw with adrenaline, every nerve screaming at him that this was the endgame. Behind him, Emma clutched Lily close, shielding the child's small frame with her own body as they struggled through the knee-deep drifts. Shadow stalked at Lucas's flank, his fur caked with ice, golden eyes sharp despite exhaustion and wounds already painting crimson across the snow. He limped slightly, but his presence radiated unwavering resolve. He knew, as did Lucas, that this night demanded everything. The gunfire started again, cracking like thunder through the storm. Bullets shredded bark, sending splinters stinging across Lucas's cheek. He shoved Emma and Lily down behind a fallen trunk, throwing himself into the snow as a round stitched across the white field. The forest lit with muzzle flashes, brief bursts of fire against the frozen dark. The hunters had become the hunted. Lucas's eyes locked on the shadowy figure ahead, Colonel Adrian Cole, the architect of betrayal, moving with the precision of a soldier who had orchestrated ambushes all his life. Cole's men fanned out like wolves, circling their shapes phantoms in the blizzard. Lucas returned fire, his pistol bucking in his hand, each shot swallowed by the storm. One of Cole's men cried out and vanished into the snow, but two more surged forward. The firefight became a blur of noise flashes and terror. The storm gave no mercy. It blinded both sides, but Cole's soldiers were relentless. "Stay down!" Lucas roared over the chaos, pressing Emma's shoulder hard against the frozen ground. Lily buried her face in her mother's coat, and trembling her muffled sobs nearly drowned by the storm. Shadow suddenly leapt ahead, a streak of muscle and fury, slamming into one of the advancing gunmen. The scream that followed was short, guttural cut-off as Shadow's jaws closed on flesh, and his weight drove the man into the snow. Gunfire erupted wildly, sparks dancing as bullets ricocheted off stone and bark. Shadow twisted, dodging his growls vibrating through the blizzard like a war drum. Cole's voice boomed above the storm, cutting through like a knife. "Bring me the girl. The rest are expendable." The order ripped Lucas apart. He rose from cover, firing into the white chaos, forcing 2 soldiers to scatter back. "Over my dead body," he shouted, throat raw. The clash spiraled into madness, figures lunging through the storm. The crack of rifles, the metallic ring of empty cartridges hitting ice. Lucas fought with the ferocity of a man who had already lost too much, every shot, a prayer, every breath, a rebellion. He closed in on Cole, their weapons barking at near point-blank range, sparks flaring as bullets shattered branches overhead. Then it happened. A soldier slipping through the storm's veil seized Lily's arm and wrenched her from Emma's grasp. Emma's scream tore the night apart, raw and animal, as Lily cried out for her mother. The man dragged her toward Cole, his rifle slung one-handed, the child thrashing desperately against his grip. "Lily." Lucas's roar broke into the storm, desperate, furious. He lunged forward, but the distance stretched cruelly, his legs heavy in the snow. Cole grinned, raising his pistol, savoring the moment. And then Shadow moved. He exploded from the whiteness, a phantom forged of muscle pain and devotion. His body collided with the soldier holding Lily, the force so violent it knocked both down in a spray of snow. Lily tumbled free, her small form rolling into the drifts, but Shadow stayed locked on his target. His jaws clamped down on the man's arm, wrenching, tearing, ignoring the screams and the rain of blows that followed. The fight was savage, primal, a storm within the storm. Cole cursed, snapping his pistol toward the blur of fur and blood. He fired. The crack was deafening. Shadow jerked mid-lunge, a raw yelp ripping from his throat as the bullet tore through his side. He collapsed into the snow, his golden eyes flashing once with shock before dimming with pain. "No." Lily's scream shredded Lucas's heart. She broke free of Emma's arms, stumbling through the snow to where Shadow lay, bleeding, her small hands reaching, clutching at his fur. "Shadow, don't leave me." Lucas felt something in him fracture. Rage surged molten, obliterating the storm, the cold, the years of guilt and pain. His vision tunneled until only Cole remained standing tall, with his pistol raised, arrogance radiating like heat. Lucas dropped his empty pistol, his voice a low growl that trembled with lethal intent. "It ends now." He lunged. The 2 men collided in the snow with a violence that shook the clearing. Cole was still powerful, his years of command backed by brutal experience. But Lucas fought like a man possessed. His fists hammered into Cole's face, the taste of blood in the air, the crack of bone under knuckles. Cole retaliated with savage precision, driving his elbow into Lucas's ribs, slamming his knee upward, grappling for dominance. The storm became background noise. It was flesh against flesh, past against present, betrayal against redemption. Each strike carried the weight of years stolen, of comrades buried, of children threatened. Cole sneered even through the blood-spitting venom between blows. "You were always weak, Reed. Always soft. That's why your men died screaming." Lucas's vision blurred with fury, his fist crashing into Cole's mouth, shattering teeth. Not this time. They rolled across the snow, grappling each, trying to reach the weapon scattered near. Lucas's fingers brushed the handle of a combat knife, half buried in the ice. He wrenched it free just as Cole's hands closed around his throat, squeezing with crushing force. Spots danced before Lucas's eyes, air clawed from his lungs. With a final surge, Lucas drove the blade upward. The steel punched through fabric, flesh, and bone. Cole's eyes widened, shock overtaking rage. A wet gasp tore from his throat as his grip faltered. Lucas shoved him back, the knife twisting free as Cole staggered, blood pouring into the snow like ink into water. Cole collapsed onto his knees, still trying to sneer, his voice broken and rasping. "You think this changes anything? The world will always belong to men like me." Lucas's reply was a whisper, lethal and resolute. "Not anymore." Cole felled the storm, swallowing his final breath. For a long moment, Lucas stood over him, chest heaving, blood and snow clinging to his skin. The victory tasted of ash. He turned, breath catching in his throat. Shadow lay in the snow, his flank rising shallowly, each breath a struggle. The crimson spread across his fur in grotesque blossoms. Lily knelt beside him, sobbing uncontrollably, her tiny fingers stroking his muzzle, as if her touch alone could will him to stay. "Please, Shadow, don't go. You can't leave me. You promised." Her words fractured into hiccuped gasps, her tears freezing on her cheeks. Lucas staggered to them, falling to his knees beside the dying dog. His hands hovered, trembling, desperate to stop the bleeding, to do something, anything. But the wound was too deep. He saw it in the way Shadow's eyes fluttered in the tremor of his chest. Emma's hand gripped Lucas's arm, her own tears streaking silently down her face. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The truth was undeniable. Lucas bent close, his forehead pressed gently against Shadow's, his voice breaking into a whisper. "You saved her. You saved us all. You're a hero, Shadow. You always were." Shadow's tail thumped once weakly against the snow, as if acknowledging the words, as if offering one final gesture of loyalty. His golden eyes shifted to Lily, holding hers, and then closed slowly, surrendering to the night. Lily screamed the sound, a raw wound torn open in the storm. She threw herself over him, clutching his still form, sobbing so hard her body shook. Lucas pulled her gently into his arms, but she fought against him, desperate to stay wrapped around her fallen protector. The storm raged on, indifferent. The forest stood silent witness. And there, in the endless white victory, felt like loss. Lucas held the child and met Emma's shattered gaze, both of them knowing the cost of survival. Shadow's body lay between them, crimson staining purity, a symbol of sacrifice that would never be forgotten. The storm had taken much. But it could not take the bond forged in blood, in fire, in love. And as Lily's sobs echoed into the night, Lucas silently swore that Shadow's sacrifice would not be in vain. The forest had fallen silent after the gunfire. Snow drifted down in thick, quiet sheets, as if the storm itself had grown weary of violence. The echoes of the battle lingered only in the ringing inside Lucas Reed's ears. He stood frozen, his chest heaving, his fists still clenched around the pistol he had emptied minutes ago. Somewhere behind him, Emma's sob caught in her throat, and Lily's small, trembling voice cut through the night. "Shadow, please, don't go." Lucas turned. The sight shattered him. Lily knelt in the snow. Her tiny hands stained crimson as she clutched the massive German shepherd against her chest. Shadow's body was heaving with ragged, uneven breaths. Blood spread beneath his fur, seeping into the snow, turning the white landscape into something brutal, merciless. The dog's eyes, those amber eyes that had carried so much fight, so much instinct and loyalty, now flickered with dimming light. He lifted his head only enough to nuzzle into the crook of Lily's arm before collapsing again. Emma hovered just behind her daughter, hands pressed to her mouth, her tears streaming unchecked. She was a woman who had learned to endure loss, who had walked through loneliness as a widow. But nothing prepared her for watching this, her child's anchor, her protector, her only sense of safety slipping away in her arms. She reached out, trying to steady Lily, but her hands trembled so violently she could barely hold her own daughter's shoulders. Lucas's knees buckled. He dropped into the snow a few feet away, unable to force his body any closer. His throat constricted until it was painful, until breathing felt like dragging barbed wire through his lungs. Shadow had saved them all. Shadow had saved him, pulled him from the teeth of death more than once in the chaos of that night. And now, as dawn threatened to break beyond the storm, the dog was paying with his life. The radio at Lucas's belt crackled. A voice announced that units had stormed the compound in town. Names of officials, businessmen, even officers within Lucas's own department spilled through the static. Arrested. All of them. It's over. But for Lucas, for Emma, for Lily, it wasn't over. It was unraveling right in front of them. Lily's cries grew softer, broken by hiccuping gasps. She pressed her cheek to Shadow's muzzle, whispering secrets no one else could hear, words that tangled in her sobs. "Thank you, don't leave me. You're my hero. I love you." The child's grief was raw, without filter, the kind of pain that reached into the marrow of anyone who heard it. Lucas had faced gunfire, betrayal, even death itself. But nothing hollowed him out like the sound of Lily's heart breaking in real time. Emma finally found her voice. She stroked her daughter's hair and whispered, "Sweetheart, he's tired. He fought so hard for us. Maybe he needs to rest now." But Lily shook her head violently, her tears soaking into Shadow's fur. "No, he can't. He promised he'd protect me forever." Lucas bowed his head. Fists pressed into the snow, teeth clenched until his jaw ached. He wanted to scream, to rage at the cruelty of it all. The corruption, the bloodshed, the fact that after years of his own failures, just when he'd found a shred of redemption, it was being torn from him again. but the sound wouldn't come. All he could do was sit in silence, bearing witness. Minutes passed like hours. Shadow's breaths grew shallower, his body trembling under Lily's desperate embrace. The snow around them was littered with the debris of battle shell casings, blood-shattered branches. Yet within that wreckage, in the circle carved by grief, there was only the little girl and her dog. Lucas finally forced himself forward, crawling through the snow until he was beside them. His hands, scarred and calloused, reached out and rested gently on Shadow's side. He felt the weak rhythm of the dog's heart beneath the blood-matted fur slowing, fading. He whispered, voice breaking, "You did good, boy. Better than any of us deserved." Shadow's ears flicked faint but deliberate. His eyes opened one last time, amber catching the dim light, and met Lucas's. There was no fear there, only trust, only peace. As though he knew he had finished his mission, and that was enough. Then, with a final breath that came out in a sigh, more than a sound, Shadow went still. Lily's wail ripped through the forest. It was piercing, primal, unrestrained. Emma pulled her daughter tight, wrapping her arms around both the girl and the dog, rocking them gently, as if to shield her child from the truth. Lucas felt his own tears blur his vision hot against the cold air. He didn't fight them this time. He let them fall, streaking down his weathered face, dropping into the snow. The storm began to ease, the wind softening, the snow slowing. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. For the first time in hours, Lucas became aware of how deathly quiet the world was, without Shadow's growl, without his presence. The sound of approaching vehicles broke the moment. Headlights cut through the forest as backup units finally reached them. Officers spilled out, weapons raised, but then lowered as they saw the scene. The fallen leader of the smuggling ring, the blood-stained snow, the woman and child crying over the dying shepherd. One officer muttered into his radio, "We've secured the area. All suspects neutralized or in custody. Send medical." His voice cracked when he added, "But it's too late for the dog." News spread quickly. By the time dawn broke over Snowpine, the small town buzzed with whispers. The once pristine image of their leaders lay shattered, corruption exposed like rot beneath painted wood. Arrests were made publicly, perp walks broadcast from the county building. Citizens lined the streets in stunned silence as the truth spilled out. Officials who had sworn to protect them had instead sold them out, feeding children into experiments, poisoning the town's soul for profit. But amid that catharsis, that release of anger, Snowpine was gripped by something else, grief. The story of the shepherd spread faster than the scandal. People spoke of the animal that had saved their children, their town, at the cost of his own life. For every headline about corruption, there was another about sacrifice. Lucas stood apart from it all, watching. He didn't attend the press conferences. He didn't care for the sudden apologies from men who had betrayed him. His place was at the edge of the cemetery, where they laid Shadow to rest, a patch of ground that would forever remain sacred. Emma and Lily stood with him, hands intertwined. The three of them were bound now, not by law or blood, but by loss. At the funeral, Lily placed her red scarf, the one she'd wrapped around Shadow's neck the day they'd named him, onto the mound of snow-covered earth. Her hands lingered there, trembling before she whispered, "Good night, Shadow. I'll see you in my dreams." Lucas couldn't speak. He only placed his hand gently on the girl's shoulder. Emma wept silently beside them. The crowd behind them, townspeople, officers, children, they had saved, stood in silence, hats removed, breath misting in the cold. The wind carried not words, but a weight, the collective acknowledgement of what had been lost. Snowpine was safe again. But the cost was carved into them all. And as Lucas turned away from the grave, his heart heavy, he understood something cruel, but true victories never came without scars. And sometimes the bravest soldiers walked on four legs. The storm had passed. Snowpine lay under a fragile stillness, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The town was bruised and raw from betrayal. But with the arrests carried out and the syndicate dismantled, dawn felt different now. The streets, once shadowed by fear, glowed faintly beneath the winter sun. Children who had been locked away were finally safe, bundled in thick coats as volunteers moved through the town square with blankets and food. Yet beneath the relief, there was a hollow space, a silence that could not be filled. That silence belonged to Shadow. Lily had not spoken much since the burial. She walked through the days with her mother's hand clasped tightly in her own, her eyes dulled by grief. But on the third night after the battle, when the snow outside glittered under moonlight, she dreamed. In her dream, the forest stretched wide and endless. But it was not the dark forest of gunfire and blood. This one was bathed in silver snow, unbroken sky, alive with stars. And across that dreamscape, Shadow ran. He was strong again, uninjured, his coat shimmering as if woven from the light itself. His paws barely touched the snow, each stride effortless, as though gravity had released him. His tongue lolled, his eyes bright with joy. He turned toward Lily, smiling if a dog could smile, and barked the sound carrying like music across the frozen field. Shadow Lily cried, her voice filled not with grief, but with wonder. She ran after him, her small boots leaving prints in the perfect snow. He slowed, letting her catch up, circling her, playfully nudging her with his muzzle. For the first time since that night, she laughed. It rang clear, echoing across the dream world, breaking through the shadows that had suffocated her heart. And then Shadow lifted his head to the sky as though listening to something beyond, something higher. He pressed his forehead gently to Lily's chest, one last nuzzle, before bounding forward, disappearing into the horizon of snow. Lily woke with tears on her cheeks, but she was smiling. She whispered into the quiet room, "He's free now." Emma found her in the morning, sitting by the window, looking out at the frosted landscape. Her daughter's face carried both loss and peace. "He came to me, Mama," Lily said softly. "He was happy. He's not hurting anymore." Emma pulled her close, heart swelling with both sorrow and gratitude. "Then maybe he wanted you to know he's still watching." From that day, Lily's healing began. Meanwhile, Lucas threw himself into work. Not the work of police reports or depositions, though the state demanded his testimony often, but the work of rebuilding lives. The rescued children were fragile, some silent like Lily had been, some restless with nightmares. Lucas, who had once believed himself too broken to be near children, now found his evenings filled with small hands tugging at his sleeve, eyes wide with questions that only he could answer. He showed them how to build a fire safely, how to tie simple knots, how to steady their breath when panic gripped them. "You're stronger than you think," he told them, echoing the words he wished someone had told him years ago. Emma worked beside him. Her tenderness filled the spaces where Lucas's rough edges could not reach. She soothed the frightened ones, sang softly to the youngest as they fell asleep, cooked meals that carried warmth deeper than the food itself. Together they created a rhythm, a fragile semblance of home inside the recovery shelter. Lily too became part of that rhythm. She shared her dream of Shadow with the other children, describing how he ran free, how he wasn't afraid anymore. Some of them began to dream as well, dreams of safety, of laughter, of light returning. In those shared whispers before bedtime, Shadow lived on, not as a tragedy, but as a guardian spirit of Snowpine. The town itself shifted. In the days after the arrests, headlines were filled with outrage. Reporters swarmed Snowpine, microphones thrust into faces demanding answers for how corruption had taken root so deeply. But the locals, though angry, began to tell another story, one that rose louder than the scandal. They spoke of the shepherd who had stood against men with guns. They told of how he had shielded a child, how he had bitten through the darkness itself. Children who had never touched him still drew pictures of Shadow on scraps of paper. His tall ears, his strong body, his fearless eyes. Someone painted his image on the wall of the town hall. Shadow leaping through snow, a streak of courage across white silence. People began to call him what he had become, the hero of Snowpine. There were arguments at first whether a dog could carry such a title, whether grief had simply romanticized his role. But as the testimonies came out, as witnesses recounted what they had seen, doubt evaporated. Shadow was not just a companion. He had been Soldier's shield savior. A petition spread quietly among the townsfolk. Within a week, it gathered hundreds of signatures. They wanted a memorial, a statue in the square so generations would remember. They wanted children to know his name long after they had forgotten the names of the corrupt men now locked behind bars. When Lucas heard of the petition, he said nothing. He simply nodded, though his jaw tightened as he turned away. For him, Shadow was not bronze or stone. Shadow was the weight that still haunted his chest when he lay awake at night. Yet he could not deny the town their need for healing, for remembering. One evening, weeks later, Lucas sat outside the shelter, cigarette between his fingers, though he never lit it. The sky stretched in bruised colors of dusk. Emma stepped out, pulling her coat tight, her breath fogging. She watched him a moment before sitting beside him on the wooden steps. "You're carrying it alone again," she said softly. Lucas stared at the unlit cigarette. "I should have protected him." "He shouldn't have had to take that bullet." Emma shook her head firmly. "Don't do that. Shadow didn't just protect Lily. He protected all of us. You know it wasn't your failure, it was his choice. That's what makes it sacrifice." Lucas finally looked at her. Her eyes were tired but unwavering. He saw the weight she carried too, the nights spent calming nightmares, the hours spent hiding her own grief so Lily could find peace. And in that gaze he felt something shift. "You're stronger than me," he murmured. Emma smiled faintly. "No, I just refuse to let the darkness take what's left." Silence settled between them. Not heavy this time, but steady, like a heartbeat. And for the first time, Lucas let himself imagine something he had buried long ago. A family not of blood, but of choice, bound not by perfect lives, but by surviving together. Inside, laughter erupted. Lily and the other children were playing some silly game, their voices echoing down the hall. Lucas listened, his throat tightening. That laughter, fragile but real, was the first true victory Snowpine had seen. Weeks blurred into months. Snowpine began to rebuild. Businesses reopened, neighbors reached out to one another. Church bells rang on Sundays again. But always in the center of the square, flowers were laid at a small wooden cross carved with a single name, Shadow. Until the statue could be built, people made sure he was not forgotten. Lily visited often. She knelt by the cross, sometimes silent, sometimes telling Shadow about her day, how she was helping the younger children read how Lucas had taught her to throw a snowball properly. "You'd like it?" she whispered once. "He's not so scary when he smiles." Emma watched her daughter heal her laughter, returning her steps lighter. It did not erase the loss, but it transformed it. Grief became gratitude. Memory became strength. Lucas too changed. He carried himself differently, not weighed down by isolation, but steadied by purpose. He still struggled with his own demons, still woke some nights with the echo of gunfire in his ears. But each time when he stepped into the shelter and saw the children sleeping safely, he knew the fight had been worth it. Snowpine had found its hero in Shadow. But in his absence, the town discovered something else, that healing was not about forgetting, but about carrying the memory forward, letting it shape them into something stronger. And so, beneath the quiet winter sky, as the town whispered his name, and a little girl dreamed of him running free, Shadow's story became more than loss. It became legacy. The snow in Snowpine had begun to settle into a softer rhythm, though the scars of the storm remained etched across the town like faint bruises on a weary face. The streets were still lined with drifts that reached halfway up shop windows. Roofs sagged under the frozen weight, and the quiet was the kind that pressed against the bones, thick, heavy, almost suffocating. Yet in that silence, something had begun to stir. Not just survival, not just recovery, but a fragile spark of rebirth. Lucas' heart stood at the edge of the town square, his coat collar pulled up against the sting of the wind. He had always been a man who carried weight decisions, regrets ghosts of comrades who hadn't made it home. Snowpine had been at first just another stop in his wandering exile. A place to hide, to keep his head low, to silence the ache that gnawed at him every night. But now, as he watched townsfolk nail boards back onto storefronts and children dart through the snow chasing after one another, he felt something unusual swelling inside him, belonging. The idea of leaving, of continuing the path he had once resigned himself to, no longer made sense. He had been trained to move forward, to never stay long enough to plant roots, to accept that his life was one of perpetual exile. Yet standing here with the town breathing life again, with Emma's laughter carrying faintly through the air as she guided Lily down the slippery steps of the clinic porch, Lucas realized that the tide had shifted. This town, scarred though it was, had claimed him. And for the first time in years, he was not fighting the claim. He took a deep breath, the cold searing down his throat, and let it anchor him. "I'm not leaving," he murmured to himself, the words tasting both terrifying and freeing. Not this time. Later that evening, the clinic lights glowed warmly against the encroaching dusk. Emma was wiping down the counter, her hands steady though her mind was racing. She had rehearsed this conversation in her head countless times since the storm broke, since Shadow had given his life for Lily, for all of them. The emptiness he left behind was vast, and yet in that void, she had found clarity. The children who had been rescued from the underground bunker were sleeping in the back room, nestled under blankets donated by townsfolk. Their faces were pale, fragile, some still etched with fear that woke them screaming in the night. Emma had spent hours at their sides, whispering comfort, promising safety she had no choice but to uphold. She saw herself in their trembling hands and their lost stares. A widow who had once clawed her way out of despair knew better than most the value of a second chance. When Lucas stepped in through the clinic door, shaking snow from his shoulders, Emma looked up, her resolve firm. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice soft but certain, "about what comes next. About how we honor Shadow and how we protect what he gave his life for." Lucas set his gloves on the counter, studying her with that quiet, piercing gaze of his. "Go on," Emma exhaled slowly. These kids, we can't just hand them off to some agency and wash our hands clean. They've been through hell. They need stability, care, love. And it's not just them. There are others out there, children abandoned, dogs discarded after they've served their purpose. What if we built something here? A place where they could heal, a place safe enough to start again. Her eyes glistened, though her tone remained steady. I want to create a center, a sanctuary. For children, and for dogs like Shadow. A place that carries his name forward. Lucas tilted his head, absorbing her words like a soldier weighing a mission. He could see the determination in her face, the fire she had been forced to stoke by circumstance, but now chose to wield. A center, he repeated. Yes, Emma said the word, firm, alive. The Shadow Center. Not just a shelter, but a home. A place where broken things are put back together. For a moment, silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the crackle of the old space heater in the corner. Then Lucas nodded once deeply. It's right. It's what he would have wanted. Emma's lips curved into a trembling smile. So you'll stay. You'll help. Lucas leaned against the counter, his eyes softening in a way Emma had rarely seen. I already made that decision. Snowpine's mine to protect now. And so are you two. Her breath caught at the weight in his words, not a fleeting promise, but a vow carved deep. Upstairs, Lily sat cross-legged on her bed, the dim light of her bedside lamp pooling across her small hands. In her lap rested the metal collar that had once circled Shadow's neck, the device that had carried both the burden of secrets and the weight of his loyalty. It was scratched bent at the hinge, cold to the touch, yet to her, it was more precious than gold. She lifted it carefully, pressing her forehead against the metal. I miss you, she whispered, her voice breaking. But I know you're still here. Her tears slipped freely now, but they no longer felt like drowning. They felt like rain watering soil after fire. She carried the collar downstairs and found her mother and Lucas waiting. I want to keep it safe, she said, her small voice filled with determination that mirrored Emma's earlier conviction. Not just for me, but for everyone. So nobody ever forgets him. Emma knelt, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's cheek. What do you have in mind, sweetheart? Lily's eyes flickered toward the wooden cabinet in the corner of the clinic's waiting room, the one with glass panes and a sturdy lock. There. We can put it inside, like a treasure, a reminder. Lucas bent down beside her, his voice low and steady. A symbol, he said. Something to tell the world what kind of hero he was. Together they walked to the cabinet. Emma opened the glass door, and Lily, with both hands cradling the collar as though it were a crown, placed it gently on the center shelf. The metal gleamed faintly in the lamplight, a silent sentinel behind the glass. The three of them stood in silence, their reflections mingling in the pain. For a moment, it felt as though Shadow himself was there, standing proud, his watchful eyes fixed on them, urging them forward. Word of the collar spread quickly through Snowpine. By morning, townsfolk began to gather at the clinic one by one to glimpse the keepsake. Men who had once scoffed at the idea of a dog being more than an animal stood with hats in their hands, eyes damp. Women brought flowers, children pressed small notes against the glass drawings of Shadow standing tall beneath the snow. He saved this town, an old man muttered, his voice rough with reverence. We owe him more than we can say. By midday, the waiting room was full. And with every visitor, Emma's vision of the Shadow Center grew clearer. This wasn't just about remembrance, it was about transformation. Lucas stood near the doorway watching the people file in and out. He saw in their faces the same mix of grief and pride that had anchored him after his own battles. But here in this snowbound town, the grief was softened by community, by a shared vow not to let sacrifice fade into nothingness. He realized Emma was right. Shadow had given them more than his life. He had given them purpose. That night, as the last of the townsfolk left, and the clinic quieted, Lucas, Emma, and Lily sat together near the fireplace. The flames painted their faces in shifting gold, their shadows long against the walls. This is just the beginning, Emma said quietly, her hand resting over Lily's. The Shadow Center will rise here, and we'll make sure no child, no soul feels abandoned again. Lucas nodded, his gaze steady. And I'll make sure no one ever dares threaten this town. Not while I'm here. Lily leaned against them both, her eyelids heavy, her small hand reaching back toward the collar in the cabinet. Shadow will always be with us, she whispered. The fire cracked, and outside the snow fell softly. No longer menacing, no longer suffocating, but gentle. Almost as if the storm itself had surrendered. The snow fell in slow, unrelenting waves, each flake catching the faint glow of lanterns that lined the square. Snowpine was blanketed in silence, except for the crunch of boots pressing into frozen ground. Tonight was unlike any other in the history of the small mountain town. People young and old, broken and healed, once divided by fear, but now united by grief, gathered together in one place. They came not to mourn only, but to honor. At the center of the square beneath the veil of snow stood the newly erected monument, the figure of a German shepherd carved in stonehead, raised high as though guarding the horizon. It was Shadow. Candles flickered around the base of the statue, tiny flames trembling against the cutting wind. Yet no one moved away. They stayed clutching their candles, shielding them with gloved hands, refusing to let the light die. Because this wasn't just about one dog, it was about what he had given them, what he had saved them from, and the truth he had carried in silence until his final breath. Lily clutched Emma's hand tightly, her small fingers trembling. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her eyes swollen from nights of tears, but there was a steadiness in her that hadn't been there before. She looked up at the statue, and in her young face was both sorrow and pride. Shadow wasn't beside her anymore, but somehow she felt him running, watching, guarding. Lucas stood to the side, his breath visible in the night air. He wore his old sheriff's coat, though the badge had been stripped from it long ago. Tonight, however, people didn't see him as a fallen officer. They saw him as the man who stood when others faltered, who had walked into the storm with them, and who had bled beside them. But even he knew he hadn't carried the town through its darkest hour. That had been Shadow. The mayor, a man who once hid behind bureaucracy, now stood humbled at the front. He raised his hand to quiet the murmurs of the crowd. Tonight his voice cracked. We are here not because of what we lost, but because of what we gained. We gained courage. We gained unity. We gained each other. And none of that would have been possible without him, without Shadow. The name rippled through the crowd like a soft prayer. A few voices whispered it again, quietly, reverently. Shadow. Shadow. Lucas stepped forward when the mayor called his name. He hadn't prepared a speech, hadn't written a single word. What could words do when none seemed big enough to contain the sacrifice of one dog, one loyal friend? But as he stood beneath the statue, snow clinging to his hair and shoulders, his eyes met Lily's. Her gaze steadied him, and he found his voice. Shadow wasn't born to be a hero. Lucas began, his tone low but cutting through the silence. He didn't wear a badge. He didn't swear an oath. And yet he lived more honorably than most men I've ever known. The crowd leaned in. Some nodded, others fought tears. Lucas continued, his throat tightening. When I first saw him, I saw a survivor, scarred, tired, hunted. But he was never broken. He carried with him something none of us understood at first. A secret, yes, but more than that. A spirit that couldn't be chained. Even when he was hurt, even when he was betrayed, he chose to trust again. He chose to love. His eyes swept across the sea of faces, each illuminated by the glow of candles. And when the time came, he didn't run. He stood between us and the storm. He stood between a little girl and death. He gave every last breath to protect what mattered most. Shadow taught us loyalty isn't about words, it's about sacrifice. And love can change an entire community. It changed me. It changed all of us. By now, tears rolled down more than a few cheeks. Some men turned away, embarrassed, while women held their children closer. Even hardened workers who rarely showed emotion bowed their heads. Lucas lifted his candle high. Tonight, we don't just remember him. We carry him forward. In every act of kindness, in every moment we choose courage over fear, and every time we protect someone weaker, we keep Shadow alive. He may be gone, but his spirit will never leave Snowpine. A hush fell so deep that even the snow seemed to pause. And then slowly, one by one, candles began to rise into the air. Children raised theirs first, then parents, then elders, with shaky hands. Soon the entire square shimmered with a sea of flames, thousands of tiny stars against the dark. Lily stepped forward. She placed a small candle at the base of the statue and whispered, her voice barely audible, but carried by the stillness, "Thank you, Shadow, for being my friend, for never leaving me." Emma knelt beside her, tears glistening as she wrapped an arm around the girl. "He's still with you, sweetheart, always." And then Lily did something no one expected. She smiled. It was fragile trembling on her lips, but it was real. Through her tears, through the ache of loss, she found a reason to smile because the whole town was calling his name, not just her. Shadow wasn't hers alone anymore. He belonged to all of them. The townsfolk began to murmur, voices building together. At first it was soft, but then it grew stronger, like the rising of a hymn. Hero, hero, hero. Not for Lucas, not for Emma, not even for themselves, but for the dog who had stood where no one else could. Snow swirled around them, caught in the glow of hundreds of flames. It looked almost as if the sky itself was honoring him, casting down flurries of light to rest on shoulders and faces. Lucas lowered his head, overcome by the moment. He had seen many ceremonies in his life, military burials, folded flags, salutes fired into the air. None had struck him as deeply as this, because this wasn't about war or duty forced upon men. This was about love, freely given. The mayor stepped aside, and the townsfolk slowly filed past the statue, each leaving something behind. A scarf, a flower, a piece of bread, a small wooden toy. Simple offerings, tokens of gratitude. Things Shadow might have carried in his mouth, guarded in his quiet way. When it was Lily's turn again, she opened her coat and revealed the old collar she had kept close. The metal tag still bore faint scratches, the kind only a long journey could etch. She placed it gently in front of the statue, her little hands trembling. "Now you'll always be here," she whispered. Emma closed her eyes, as though sealing the promise into the air. The ceremony stretched on. No one hurried to leave. People lingered in the cold, talking softly, sharing stories of Shadow, how they first saw him. How they never forgot the moment he charged into danger. How he had looked into their eyes as though he knew them all. For a dog who had spoken no human word, he had left behind a legacy of countless voices. And in that gathering, Snowpine was no longer the same town. It was no longer fractured by corruption, fear, or silence. They had bled together, mourned together, and now healed together. And at the heart of that transformation was a single dog who had carried more weight than most men ever could. Lucas stood with Emma and Lily as the night deepened. The candles burned low, their wax spilling into the snow like rivers of light. He felt the girl's small hand slip into his, and Emma's touch steady his other arm. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man carrying failure. He felt like part of a family. He looked up at the statue one last time, before the crowd began to disperse. Snowflakes drifted across Shadow's stone face. But somehow the carved eyes seemed alive, watching, guarding, waiting. Lucas whispered quietly, meant only for him. "Rest easy, partner. We'll take it from here." Behind him, Lily let out a small laugh through her tears. "They're all calling him a hero, Emma." "They're all saying it." Emma smiled softly, brushing the girl's hair from her face. "Because that's what he is, and he always will be." The bells of the church tolled in the distance, marking the close of the ceremony. But in the hearts of the people, the moment would never end. Every time snow fell on Snowpine, every time a candle flickered in the dark, they would remember. And so, beneath the frozen stars, with the town united in grief and love, Shadow's legacy was sealed, not just in stone, but in the blood and breath of everyone he had saved. Snowpine would never forget. Under the pale glow of a new dawn, Snowpine seemed different. The blizzards had passed, and though drifts of snow still curled against rooftops and fences, there was a strange warmth lingering in the air. A warmth not born from fire or electricity, but from the way people walked with softened eyes and gentler steps. The town had been carved open by tragedy, but from its wounds something new had begun to grow. And at the heart of it, like a seed planted in frozen soil, stood the dream that Emma had dared to speak aloud, the Shadow Center. On the morning of its opening, the townsfolk gathered bundled in scarves and coats, their breath rising like little clouds. Some came with children clinging to their hands, others with leashes wrapped around their gloved fingers, guiding dogs who had known abandonment, hardship, and cold. The building itself wasn't grand. It had been an old timber hall renovated with patience and sleepless nights. Yet when sunlight struck the frosted windows, they shimmered like stained glass, and the carved wooden sign above the door, Shadow Center, gleamed with gold leaf that Lily herself had helped paint. Inside, warmth radiated from the walls. The scent of cedar mingled with that of fresh-baked bread. One wing of the center was lined with small, cozy rooms for children who had nowhere safe to sleep. Another opened into a kennel space, each pen carefully built, not as cages, but as little sanctuaries, with blankets, toys, and skylights cut into the roof to let in daylight. In the common room, a mural stretched from floor to ceiling, Shadow captured mid-leap, painted larger-than-life snowflakes caught in the fur around his muzzle eyes, burning with the quiet courage that had saved them all. Lucas stood near the entrance, watching as villagers streamed in. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a man drifting without anchor. The ghosts of his past still whispered, but their grip had loosened. He wasn't running anymore. Snowpine had asked him to stay, and he had answered. When a boy tugged at his sleeve shyly, asking if he could hold one of the puppies, Lucas smiled a real, unguarded smile and knelt to guide the child's hands. He hadn't known he could still do that. Emma moved among the crowd with quiet grace, though her eyes shone with emotion she tried to contain. For her, the Shadow Center was more than a promise kept. It was redemption, a chance to rewrite the history of a town that had once turned its back on the truth. Her voice carried when she welcomed them all. This is a place where no child will be forgotten and no creature cast aside. Here loyalty will be honored and love will be the rule we live by. The words trembled at the edges, but no one missed their weight. Heads nodded and hands squeezed tighter around the little ones beside them. And then there was Lily. She stood before the glass display at the far end of the hall, where Shadow's collar lay against a bed of velvet. Her reflection wavered on the glass, small but steady, her breath fogging the surface. She pressed her palm lightly against it, as though touching the memory itself. To her, Shadow wasn't gone. He had simply changed shape, become snow in the wind, warmth in her chest, the courage in her tiny voice. She turned to see the children entering, some with wide, frightened eyes, and others with hesitant smiles as they reached down to stroke the dogs that wagged their tails in cautious welcome. Lily's heart lifted. Shadow's story wasn't ending here. It was multiplying, spilling into every corner of this place. The day unfolded like a living testament to that truth. A pair of brothers who had been rescued from the underground huddled together on the couch, eyes darting until a golden retriever padded over and laid its head on their knees. Slowly, their shoulders eased. In another corner, a girl with tangled hair clutched a stuffed toy, while Lucas gently guided a husky pup into her lap. Emma found herself wiping her eyes as laughter, real ringing laughter, filled the room. The Shadow Center wasn't merely opening, it was breathing. By evening the crowd thinned, but the sense of something sacred lingered. Lucas, Emma, and Lily sat together near the hearth, firelight flickering across their faces. For the first time, they allowed themselves to feel what had grown between them. Not just companionship forged in crisis, but family. The words settled into Lucas's chest with an ache that was almost unbearable. He had lost comrades, lost a piece of himself in battle and betrayal. But sitting beside Emma with Lily leaning against his shoulder, he understood what survival was truly for. Not just to keep breathing, but to find the people who made life worth breathing for. That night, after the last candle was extinguished, after the children had been tucked into their new beds and the dogs curled up in their warm pens, Lily slipped outside into the snow. The moon hung silver above the trees, casting the world in a quiet glow. A small puppy padded after her, clumsy in its steps, ears too big for its head. Lily crouched, scooped it into her arms, and twirled in the falling flakes. Her laughter carried softly, rising like a song into the night. She tilted her head, whispering into the puppy's fur, "Shadow will always be here." The words weren't meant for anyone else yet. They lingered in the air as if the snow itself had taken them in. For in that moment, Lily wasn't alone. She felt it, the familiar brush of warmth, the silent guardian who had once walked beside her. Shadow wasn't buried in the ground. He lived in every heartbeat of this new beginning, in every step the rescued children took toward healing, in every wagging tail, and every act of kindness that followed. From the trees, the wind stirred, lifting snow in soft spirals. And if one listened closely, it almost sounded like a dog's joyful bark echoing through the valley. The camera of Ifewood pulled back, perhaps showing the town blanketed in white lights, glowing from the windows of the Shadow Center, laughter spilling into the night. Above it all, the final message etched itself, not in words carved on stone, but in the hearts of those who stood there. Love and loyalty can rewrite destiny. The screen faded to black, leaving behind the image of Lily's smile in the snow. The puppy pressed against her chest, and the echo of Shadow's presence, eternal, unbroken, alive in every breath of Snowpine.